orbit, the contents which are there, but most of the contents we have already discussed. The nerves we have done, mostly the oculomotor, the cochlear, the acoustic, and the branches from the ophthalmic division of trigeminal. So the major focus would be on the muscles, the extraocular muscles, and the movements which the extraocular muscles are going to produce. So that is the key area, and you need to understand the movements of the extraocular muscles, which muscle is going to do what type of movement, and how we are going to test that. And the first half is mainly on the eyeball, and we are going to talk about the lids, we are going to talk about the eyeball itself, the lacrimal apparatus. So the first half is mainly on the eye, the second half mainly on the orbit, but in the orbit particular references to the extraocular muscles and their movements. Okay? So we start with the way the eye looks to us. So what you see here, which is labeled as number 1, is the white portion of your eye. And this white portion of your eye is basically the sclera. And then you can see the number 2, which is the transparent, more convex portion of the eye in front of that white area. So if you go from the white area towards the central piece, where you have a more convex part of your eye, it's the cornea. It's a transparent structure. The cornea is the place where you are going to put up your contact lenses. If you have been using contact lenses, you are going to put it over the top of your cornea. So this convex area in front of the sclera is the cornea, and then behind the cornea there is a space, and that space is filled with fluid, the aqueous fluid, and then you have this diaphragm, which is a pigmented diaphragm you see, and that pigmented diaphragm is the iris, and within the iris there is a hole which is the pupil. So between iris and the cornea there is a space, and that space is called the anterior chamber of the eye, and this anterior chamber is filled up with the aqueous humor or aqueous fluid. So normally when you look at the eye from this side, you probably would not be able to appreciate the anterior chamber of the eye, but if you see the eye from the side, you can see the space between the cornea and the iris, and that space is filled up with the aqueous humor, and that is called the anterior chamber of the eye. Then you can see the junction of the cornea with the sclera, and the junction of the cornea with the sclera is called the limbus. So a limbus has several important structures which we are going to discuss in a minute, but you need to know that the junction between the sclera and the cornea is called the limbus. Then you have an upper eyelid and you have a lower eyelid, and where these lids are joining on the medial side, it's called the medial canthus, and where the lids are joining on the lateral side, it is called the lateral canthus. So if you hear these terms, medial canthus and lateral canthus, just the junction of the upper and the lower eyelid. And the lids are usually referred as palpebral. So when you hear the term palpebral, it means the lid. So the fissure between the two lids, the space between the two lids, is the palpebral fissure. So this is a lid, this is the upper lid, this is the lower lid. Between them, the fissure is called the palpebral fissure. Now over the top of the sclera, there is another transparent, the anterior part of the sclera. You cannot see the posterior part of the sclera. The posterior part of the sclera is not visible. The only part which you are seeing is the anterior part of the sclera. Over the anterior part of the sclera, there is a transparent membrane which is attached, it is transparent, that's why you are seeing the sclera from through it. And that transparent membrane is called the conjunctiva. Conjunctiva is attached over the anterior surface of the sclera, and it is also present on the inner surface of your lids. So from the anterior surface of the sclera, it is going to reflect over the inner surface of the lids. So conjunctiva is a transparent membrane which is attached over the anterior surface of the sclera, and it is also reflected over the inner surface of the lids. But it does not cover the cornea. So at the limbus, you would have the conjunctiva finishing. So conjunctiva is going over the anterior surface of the sclera, but it goes up to the junction of the cornea of the sclera. And then it is reflected on the inner surface of the lids. So when you are going to close your lids, this will become a conjunctival sac. Because when you are going to close up the lids, the cavity inside is all lined by conjunctiva. So it will become a conjunctival sac. Okay, so now we are going to move forward and we are going to talk about the lids a little bit more. So what you are seeing here is a cross section of the lids. So we start from the outer aspect, which is the skin, and then inner to the skin you can see this muscle which is there, and this muscle is the orbicularis oculi muscle. And this is the palpebral part of the orbicularis oculi, which is present inside the eyelids. So from outside you have skin, and then you have the orbicularis oculi. And the orbicularis oculi, you should know that the major function of orbicularis oculi is to close the eye. And it is supplied by the facial nerve. So the zygomatic branch of the facial nerve is going to supply the orbicularis oculi, and the major function of the orbicularis oculi is to close the eye. So if you have a facial palsy, you would not be able to close the eye. So that would lead to dryness of the eyes and other things would happen. Okay. Next to the muscle, you can see these tarsal plates. Can you see these tarsal plates? The green things? So this is the superior tarsal plate and this is the inferior tarsal plate. Tarsal plates are connective tissue, but they are made up of connective tissue. So you can feel your lids and you will feel that there is a little bit of thickness. This thickness is formed by the tarsal plates. And these are mainly collagen fibers which are going to form these connective tissue elements which are called the tarsal plates. On the tarsal plate, in the superior tarsal plate, you have this muscle attached which is called the levator palpebral superioris. So levator palpebral superioris is attached on the tarsal plate. The major function of the levator palpebral superioris is to open the upper eyelid. So upper eyelid, lower eyelid you don't need to open, it remains stationary, but the upper eyelid you need to open. So you close your eye by orbicularis oculi and you open your eye by the action of the levator palpebral superioris. Now levator palpebral superioris has two parts, the superior part and the inferior part. The inferior part is a skeletal muscle. The superior part of the levator palpebral superioris, mainly the anterior fibers are smooth muscle fibers. So they are supplied by the sympathetic innervation. So levator palpebral superioris has dual nerve supply. The skeletal muscle part is supplied by the oculomotor nerve and the smooth muscle part is supplied by the sympathetic innervation. That's why when you have ptosis, that means the drooping of the eyelid, if there is a complete drooping of the eyelid, that would be because of the skeletal muscle part of the levator palpebral superioris, and that is because of the damage to the oculomotor nerve. If you have partial ptosis, then it is usually the paralysis of the smooth muscle part of the levator palpebral superioris, and that is by the sympathetic innervation. So in Horner syndrome, when you have partial ptosis, it is because of the paralysis of the smooth muscle part of the levator palpebral superioris. And this smooth muscle part of the levator palpebral superioris is also called Muller's muscle. So if you hear the term Muller's muscle, don't get confused, it's just a smooth muscle part of the levator palpebral superioris. Now the other things which are present in the lid, in the tarsal plate you have these tarsal glands, which are also called Meibomian glands. And the function of the Meibomian glands is to produce lipid or lipid-filled or oily secretions. Why do you need to have these oily secretions which are produced here? And they are going to be, the ducts of the Meibomian glands are on the inner aspect of the lid, and these will prevent the evaporation of the tear film. Because what happens is that tears are going to be produced, from the lacrimal gland, and your lids would work like wipers. So what they would do is they would put a tear film over the surface of your cornea. But then you need to have oily secretion over the top of the tear film so that the water doesn't evaporate, because your eyes are open, so the water would evaporate and your cornea will become dry. So you don't want your cornea to become dry. So what you want is that over the top of the tear film there is an oily secretion which will stop the evaporation. So that is going to come from these meibomian glands, and also from these sebaceous glands which are present on the outer aspect of the lids, which are called the glands of Moll and Zeiss. These are sebaceous glands. They are present between the hair follicles on the lid margins. So they are going to produce these sebaceous secretions, and the tarsal glands are going to produce lipid-filled oily secretions, and these secretions will lie over the top of the tear film, which will stop the evaporation of the tears or the tear film from the surface of the cornea. Because you should also understand that cornea is only getting the oxygenation from the dissolved air in the tear. So there is no direct blood supply to the cornea, and it is only getting the oxygenation and nutrition from the dissolved air in the tear film. So you don't want the tear film to evaporate, because if it evaporates, then your cornea will become dry. It would not be able to get its oxygenation, and that would lead to ulceration of the cornea. And cornea is also very important in terms of your refractive power of your eye. So the most powerful thing in your eye in terms of refraction is the cornea. And if cornea becomes deformed or something happens to it, then your vision would be compromised in great detail. Okay, so what you can happen is that because these glands are producing oily secretions, their ducts can be blocked. And if there would be a blocking of the duct of the meibomian gland, there would be infection of the tarsal glands. And the infection of the tarsal gland is usually called internal podolum, while the infection of the glands of Zeiss and Moll is called the external podolum. So if you hear the term external podolum or internal podolum, these are basically commonly called as stye. You have a stye in the eye, that's commonly common name for it. But you need to see where the bulging is. If it is on the lid margin, then it is the infection of gland of Zeiss and Moll, and that is called external podolum. If it is on the inner aspect of the eye, that is the internal podolum, and that's the infection of the glands of meibomian glands. And sometimes there could be a chronic infection of the meibomian gland, and that is going to result in a cyst formation, which is called the lesion. Yes.
Are these glands will cause the rock stings when you wake up? Are these the glands that cause like the rock stings when you wake up?
Yeah, so if you have a little bit of a cheesy type of secretion, that is coming from these glands, because it's the oily secretion which comes from there. So you can see it here. This is on the lid margin you can see a bulging, and that's the external podolum. And this one is basically the infection of the meibomian gland, which is the internal podolum. Now we are going to look at the conjunctiva. So the parts of the conjunctiva, we said that conjunctiva is covering the external surface of the sclera. So this is the bulbar part of the conjunctiva, and this part is the inner aspect of the lid, which is the conjunctiva is covering. So this is the palpebral part of the conjunctiva, and this is the area where there is in some fornix, it's a depression. When your conjunctiva is going to go here, it is going to form a depression, and that depression is called fornix. So you would have an inferior fornix, and you would have a superior fornix of the conjunctiva. Why it is important? Because fornix is a depressed space. So it is a place where the foreign bodies can dislodge. Your lash can break down and go into the fornix, there could be a a dust particle or any foreign object which you would have in the eye can easily dislodge into the fornices. So you need to invert the eye to see the fornices and see if there are any foreign objects there, because the foreign objects are going to cause a lot of irritation and you start to rub your eye. So you need to look into the fornix and see if there is a foreign object there and remove it by putting plenty of water, cleaning it up, and that would allow the foreign objects to be taken out from the eye. Now, the common things which can happen to the conjunctiva are conjunctivitis is the most common thing, but we are also going to see certain other things which are related with the conjunctiva. But the most common thing which can happen to the conjunctiva is the acute conjunctivitis, which happens with viral infection. Adenoviruses usually result in inflammation of the conjunctiva, and that is very contagious also. So if you have pink eye because of the conjunctivitis, because of the adenovirus infection, it can be very contagious and it can go from one person to the other. So usually you would see people wearing dark glasses when they have conjunctivitis, and they don't want to touch any places because the virus can be transmitted by touching each other or from one place to the other. The other conditions which you can see here, one of this is called pterygium, where you can see part of the conjunctiva is moving over the top of the cornea. So usually the conjunctiva does not go beyond the limbus, but if you see the part or the benign growth of the conjunctiva over the cornea, then it is called the pterygium. So pterygium is a condition where you have benign growth of the conjunctiva over the top of the cornea. Pingingula is basically a degenerative condition of the conjunctiva, and you can see there is a degeneration of conjunctiva here, and that is called the pingingula. So these are some of the common things which you will see associated with conjunctiva. Yes. Yeah, so this is the pingingula. This is a degenerative lesion of the conjunctiva. You can see the lipid-filled material inside the conjunctiva, and that is the degenerative thing which is happening here.
Doctor, is this spontaneous, acquired or?
It's a degenerative condition. So over the period of time in the age, there would be degeneration of the conjunctiva, and you can see it is no more transparent here. There is lipid-filled material inside the conjunctiva. So this is a common type of degenerative change. So if you start to hear these terminologies, the ophthalmologist would be talking about these pingingula and pterygium. So you should be aware of these terms. What does the pterygium means or pingingula means? Okay. Next we are going towards the lacrimal apparatus, and for lacrimal apparatus you should know that we have the lacrimal gland, which is located here in the upper lateral part of the orbit. It has two portions. One is called the orbital part of the lacrimal gland, the other is called the palpebral part of the lacrimal gland. So the part which is above in the upper part of the orbit and which is not visible, because if you turn your upper eyelid, you would still not be able to see the orbital part of the lacrimal gland, but you would be able to see the palpebral part of the lacrimal gland, because the lacrimal gland is like a C-shaped thing, and in between there is the superior rectus muscle. So part of it is lying above it and part of it is lying below it. So the part which is lying below it is the palpebral part, the part which is lying above it is the orbital part of the lacrimal gland. The lacrimal gland is going to open into the eye by 10 to 12 ducts in the superior fornix of the conjunctiva. So it is going to open into the superior fornix of the conjunctiva by 10 to 12 ducts. And then we know that the lacrimal gland is going to produce the lacrimation, and your lids are going to act like wipers, and they are going to spread the spear film over the top of the anterior aspect of the eye. So if you have something coming in the superior fornix and then your lids are moving down